Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Advocates LSU Sports Update. After a few-week hiatus here, we are coming to you live to talk about the early signing period that starts on Wednesday, LSU recruiting, transfer portal, all those things. I am Advocate LSU beat writer Wilson Alexander, joined by my colleague Leah Vann. Leah, I noticed your earrings. Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
What have you been doing to celebrate the Festival of Lights?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a little gathering at the Capitol for the first night where we lit the first candle together, and I made some latkes, which, if you don't know, are basically like hash browns, except a lot more onions and flour and just a lot better. You dip them in applesauce, and they're fantastic. So,
They are excellent. They are definitely excellent. Yes. Holiday season, so Hanukkah going on, everybody preparing for Christmas and all those things. And in the midst of it is the early signing period, Wednesday through Friday. Nowadays, the main signing day sort of has pretty much replaced the what used to be the regular national signing day in February. LSU will be signing the majority of its class on Wednesday, and we're going to start by diving into that. We'll get in later into kind of what's coming down the line with this recruiting class, transfer portal targets, what comes next, and all those sorts of things. If you have any questions, throw them our way. We'll get to them as we go. But Leah, let's start off with this. What do you expect to see out of signing day on Wednesday when you're looking at this class? What do you what's your prediction for what happens on Wednesday?
yeah, I mean, it seems like all of the guys are pretty much on lock. I think there's 25 of them. Yes, 25. I guess one of them, Dalen Austin, who is a cornerback from Long Beach, California. He did show on Twitter that he took a visit to Louisville this weekend. He's been a little bit on the fence lately, so he might be like somebody to watch as far as like the flipping goes. But otherwise, I see LSU is signing a lot of defensive backs. I think there's 7 total if you include Austin, and 4 of them are corners. So I think that's pretty notable. And then they have 2 tight ends. These are 2 positions that they have been super thin on or are super thin on right now. And, we've obviously got the big names from Louisiana, 4 of the top 10 names in the state. So I think that, LSU is going to fill a lot of gaps. And I think if you look at some of these other guys who we still don't know if LSU is going to sign yet, like Desmond Ricks and Jordan Hall, I think those could also fill in some other gaps and kind of dictate whether or not LSU really hits the transfer portal hard or only gets like 2 or 3 guys.
Yeah, like you said, it feels like it's going to be not really like a day of fireworks or anything. So we'll see if it's signing day. So, I mean, surprising stuff happens all over the place. But like you said, LSU's kind of had its class locked up. It's spent the last few weeks taking in-home visits to a lot of guys that were already in this 2023 class committed, and that they kind of got them locked down. And the majority of this class is going to sign here. And everybody if you're an LSU fan, you probably heard of for the last few months because they've had most of these guys locked in. Obviously, added JV and Toviano recently, but there's not like a signing day announcement right on this year that relates to LSU because Desmond Ricks isn't until Thursday. Isaac Smith, I think, will be one to watch. 4-star safety, defensive back out of Mississippi. He was just at LSU for an official visit. And then, that because you mentioned the defensive back, if LSU closes here with Ricks and Isaac Smith, they could have 9 defensive backs in this class, which is really big for this whole roster because we've written about and talked about what the situation at cornerback heading into next season. LSU could still go into the transfer portal for 1 or 2 guys, but they're really going to be relying on these freshmen. Ricks will be a huge one. I feel like as we talk about targets and things like that, which we'll get to, we're going to go ahead and kind of talk about it because I feel like that's kind of the main thing to what people want to know is Ricks. I mean, is there anybody else who you've seen the LSU is targeting or and why, or I don't know, what are your thoughts about Desmond Ricks and what LSU would be getting in him?
Yeah, I think he's a kind of guy who could probably play right away. From my understanding is, he is. Why can't I pull up his profile right now? But yeah, so he's a 5-star. Obviously, I'm sorry, I'm struggling. Here we go. Yeah, so he's tall, he's fast, he's kind of everything that you want in a cornerback. And I do think I do worry if like maybe some of the other guys will see that commitment and like flip. But I think it definitely adds depth to the position. Jordan Hall is another guy that I think LSU could really use. The defensive line, especially interior linemen, are like kind of numbered. I mean, we saw Mekhi Wingo has like taken the most snaps out of any defensive lineman in the entire FBS and FCS football. So that's pretty crazy. I know that LSU has a lot of edge rushers in this class, but not a lot of those defensive tackles, which could be a position that they hit the portal for. But I think if they land Jordan Hall, that 4-star, he's a defensive lineman from Jacksonville, Florida. I think that could be really key in really completing this class for sure. But I also think they're definitely going to go to the portal for that position. What have you seen in Desmond Ricks, since I was unable to answer the question very well?
Let's find out. Yeah, kind of puts you on the spot there a little bit. Desmond's just interesting because he reclassified from 2024 to 2023. In 2024, he was, I think, the number 2 player overall. And then he reclassified. And I mean, when you reclassify, usually your ranking's going to drop a little bit because, there's a less year evaluation and a whole variety of reasons. You're usually less developed than the class ahead of you. And he's still one of the top cornerbacks in the country and somebody who could possibly play day one for LSU and come just right in and maybe play, which would be really wild just because I don't know how many examples we've seen of guys who have come in and reclassified and been able to play right away. I mean, Quinn Ewers comes to mind. He reclassified. He went to Ohio State. He sat for a year before going to play at Texas, and now he's playing in what would have been his original freshman year, and he played pretty well. But Desmond would be asked to come up, a year ahead of schedule maybe and have to play. I think that's why it's important that LSU still got Javian Toviano recently, because he's somebody else who might have that ability to play day one. And it's got a lot of other defensive backs in this class. And like we said, they still might go into the portal. Maybe someone like Denver Harris, the Texas A&M transfer, although that's more of a discussion we'll have, I think, a little bit later. Other positions in this class, we started talking about it a little bit, but what are maybe the biggest holes that LSU is filling in this class? I think we've gone over cornerback and defensive back a good bit. You alluded to tight end. What are some of the other ones in this class where you look over the list and you say, okay, LSU did a really good job of addressing these areas?
Yeah, I think offensive line, right? You've obviously got the top guy out of Louisiana, Zaylen Hurd, and you've also got a couple of other big names. DJ Chester out of Georgia. He's a 4-star. He's also a big guy, 6'5", 300, coming out of high school. We know that LSU lacked a little bit of depth or experience on the offensive line. And yeah, okay, these are freshmen that they can develop, but maybe we'll see some other guys that are like a Will Campbell or like a Emory Jones who can maybe kind of patch up that interior part. I know these guys are tackles. Tyree Adams, obviously, New Orleans. I mean, I think you were working on a story about in-state offensive linemen and how Louisiana usually doesn't have a lot of these guys. So I wonder what's kind of caused that uptick in Louisiana based offensive linemen.
The answer is really just luck and coincidence. I mean, Will Campbell came in last year. He was number 36 overall in the country, and he was the highest rated in-state offensive lineman since Cam Robinson in 2014. He was the highest rated offensive tackle to sign with LSU since La'el Collins in 2011. And then now in back-to-back years, they've got top 40 guys. Zaylen Hurd, he's 28 overall, and according to the 24/7 Sports Composites, he's the only consensus 5-star in this class. And it's kind of wild. I mean, back-to-back years, you've had guys like this, and it's really just sort of generational and luck in a way, especially the fact that both of them have come out of Neville High School up in Monroe. They were on the same offensive line for a year there last season. Will Campbell's senior year, Lance's junior year, they were bookend tackles, and to have both of them at the same time, Neville was, it knows, its coaches will tell you, we're very fortunate to have both of them on offensive line at the same time, but it's really just kind of luck. But it isn't just the fact that it's just Lance. He's kind of the big reason why this is all of a sudden back-to-back years really good offensive line props. But we've seen Emory Jones obviously come in and play pretty much right away, very early in the season, take over at right tackle. And Tyree Adams, while he doesn't have the hype of Zalance, he's a 4-star from New Orleans, a top 200 prospect, and those don't roll out of the state all the time. It's a state that produces wide receivers and defensive backs and running backs like crazy, but not always top tier offensive tackles. And now back-to-back years they've got them, and LSU's not only are they coming out of state, but LSU's been able to land both of them with Will Campbell and Zalance Hurd. And you're talking about possible 2 offensive tackles of the future there. Maybe Jones can slide inside where he might project further as a guard, but obviously he played really well at tackle. So you start to see exactly what you're saying, where LSU is set up really well on the offensive line moving forward, and maybe in its best position on the offensive line that it's been in a while, just because of some in-state guys who are coming out of Louisiana. I also think edge rusher, they seem to be taken care of in this class. With Deshaun Womack, he's a 4-star, 5-star, depending on where you look. Edge out of Baltimore. Jackson Howard is an edge out of Minneapolis. And you start to see more and more of these guys, like some edge rushers and players who are from Nevada and Ohio, and not just a Louisiana flavor to this class. There's really kind of a national feel. Now, something that you wrote about, why is that the case, that there is kind of this national flavor in a way to this class?
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of people, and it's all based on these previous connections that these assistant coaches from Brian Kelly's staff have made, either while they're at Notre Dame or uniquely enough with Jeremiah Hughes out of Las Vegas. He had a connection to a grad assistant actually on LSU's staff. It was actually his high school coach who switched him from wide receiver to cornerback and said, this is where you're going to have the most potential. And so I wrote about that and how, I think the name of the graduate assistant is Nico Furtada. So he played for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame and became a grad assistant here at LSU. And so he really played an intricate role in getting Jeremiah to commit here. Another guy I think of is Jackson McGohan. I need to learn how to pronounce these names. But he had a connection to Mike Denbrock, who was recruiting him for Cincinnati. And Jackson is from Ohio and said, well, originally I was looking to stay close to home, but I like the way Mike Denbrock has developed tight ends. And he was kind of the guy who told me to switch from wide receiver to tight end if I gained some weight. And he kind of monitored his progress throughout his time in high school. So it's really these long-term connections that you'll see in my story that make this class so much more national. And same with guys like Jackson Howard, who had connections from being recruited at Notre Dame. And then there's just Jamar Kane, who also had connections. He out of Arizona State was recruiting one of the guys that I'm not going to give away my whole story, but he's recruiting one of the guys from out of state. So yeah, it does have a national feel because LSU now with these assistants, they have connections on the West Coast. They have connections on the East Coast because that's what they had to do when they were at Notre Dame. I think one of the other gaps that we didn't talk a lot about as far as, what this class is bringing is 2 running backs. And I know that LSU has been playing this running back by committee thing, but it really doesn't have a star power at the position right now. And so 2 of these guys, we've got Caleb Jackson. I'm going to his signing tomorrow. He's from here in Baton Rouge. He had offers from Alabama and A&M. And so then you've got Trey Hawley, who's a big name. And he's got 5 seasons of varsity experience, I guess. So that's pretty impressive. And, he was getting recruited by Arkansas and Auburn and, all those guys. So both of those guys, I'm interested to see what comes out of their development and, if they're able to be the star that we're kind of looking for, consistency in that running back position.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see what Frank Wilson can do with them once they get here and, add them to a room with Josh Williams and maybe John Emery coming back and all for his, super senior year potentially. And Armani Goodwin, you've got a pretty good looking running back room there. It'll be interesting to see, like you said, how they develop. So that leaves us, I think, let's maybe get back to who else you're still targeting. Obviously, there's a few still gaps in this class, like you said, that are going to, in a big way, dictate what they target in the transfer portal. Aaron Anderson has obviously committed from Alabama, the former #1 player in Louisiana last year. He's the only person LSU has added through the transfer portal so far. And he gives them some depth at wide receiver, potentially a guy who could end up, in the future starting at wide receiver. I mean, he was the #1 player in the class, like we said, out of the state. Technically a 4-star, but at times a 5-star, just depending on kind of where you looked. Really highly, didn't really play at Alabama this last year, but I think instantly helps them in the return game. So that's a need that gets checked off. Maybe there's also a freshman who could help out there, but I think Aaron is a really good candidate for that. And then it also gives you, a 5'9" guy who probably plays out of the slot wide receiver, somebody who's really fast to add just to that receiver room. So you got the returner there, but I think there's still, and they've addressed tight end in this class. They may still take a transfer tight end, but like you mentioned earlier, interior defensive linemen, cornerbacks, which, like we said, could be Denver Harris. Is there other positions where you look at and see, okay, LSU is still needs guys at these spots? And are there any names that kind of come to mind who could potentially fill that?
I still think like the guard position, offensive guards, like you kind of need you need some guys to build up the interior. And we saw the battle for the center position this year, and that was a little bit of a disaster in the beginning, and then it kind of settled in. I think they probably could use some depth there just in case, right? And kind of build that up and also develop it. Maybe that's one of these tackles, but we'll have to see. And but yeah, I mean, mainly I think what we're looking at as far as the guys that we've discussed is the cornerback position is probably the main thing, and interior defensive line. And then I think the transfer portal will fill in the rest of the gaps. And I haven't quite looked at the prospects there. Have you?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we mentioned Isaac Smith is another, like in terms of guys
Right.
who LSU is still targeting. Isaac would be one to watch for in terms of someone who could, pop here on signing day. Desmond, maybe Jordan Hall, and Nicholas Harbor. He's a 5-star athlete. LSU seems like it's in the running for him. It might be, I don't know if it's had him on campus here recently at all, but, somebody who Jamar Kane was recruiting, and if they can end up landing him or something, that would really be a huge get if they could somehow get him. But it looks like Desmond and Isaac are kind of some of the last, at least go for the early signing period, guys to really keep your eye on. When it comes to the transfer portal, defensive linemen, those interior guys, the name is suddenly slipping out of my mind for some reason, but there's a defensive lineman from Arizona who was in the portal, who would be a really big get. Braden Swinson is an edge rusher from Oregon. He didn't have a super productive career at Oregon over the last 3 seasons, but he is somebody who has played 3 seasons with a Power 5 program. LSU, of course, B.J. Ojolari has left for the NFL. Desmond Little into the transfer portal. The only player at that jack linebacker spot returning right now is Xavier Carter. And so LSU really needs an edge rusher. It's got these freshmen coming in that we mentioned with Deshaun Womack and Jackson Howard and all, but it's hard for freshmen, even though we saw LSU use freshmen right away this year, it is hard for them to get on the field necessarily. It's not something you necessarily want to rely on. And so Braden Swinson could be a decent option there if they're able to get him. And then Denver Harris is a cornerback from Texas A&M. He has been connected to LSU. He is, certainly the staff has interest in him. I think he's met with Brian Kelly, as I understand. And this is all because there are some, LSU's trying to do its due diligence and making sure that he's going to be the right fit. LSU, Brian Kelly talks a lot about fit when it looks at transfers, regardless of who they're looking at. They love the Louisiana ties, but, fit is a big thing. And Denver was suspended for a game against Miami, reportedly because of a violation of team rules, I think a curfew violation. And then he was indefinitely suspended the second half of the season. A couple of freshmen were, and he was one of them for a locker room incident. And he didn't play the last 6 games at Texas A&M, and then he entered the transfer portal. And so LSU is going to have to make sure it's done all its homework and feels comfortable taking him if he's going to end up here. But that's kind of another person to watch out of the transfer portal. Paris Shand, yes, thank you. Leah is the Arizona defensive lineman, with 2 years of eligibility there. Because like you said, expand on it a little more why it's so important for LSU to add defensive linemen, because we think first team, Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith and even Jacobian Guillory is coming back, and Jacqueline Roy hasn't announced what he's doing at this point. It wouldn't be a surprise if he left for the NFL, but even though they have some guys there, like, I mean, Makai was a third-team AP All-American. Why would it be so important for LSU to add a defensive lineman at that spot?
Yeah, I mean, exactly for the reason that we saw this year when Mason Smith went down, and then it was like, oh crap, there's really Makai Wingo, and then all of a sudden, if Makai would have gotten hurt this year, who knows what LSU would have done on the interior. So, and like we said, he played the most snaps out of everybody in FBS football and at that position at least. And so I think that, adding depth and also like being able to rotate guys, right? And add that multiplicity that Matt House talks about, guys with different skill sets, guys that are different sizes. I mean, that can kind of help on the interior, like maybe getting a guy who's like a true nose tackle and then getting another guy who's a little bit more versatile. I mean, that will help kind of, make this defense even stronger than it already was. Obviously, it was kind of LSU's strong suit anyway this year, which was impressive. But I think, as far as injuries go, and, I think Brian Kelly even talked about this, was like player safety, just all together, like adding depth and being able to rotate guys in and out, guys on the line, whether it's defensive or offensive. Those guys are playing every single down and they're hitting guys. So, you've got to be able to, well, blocking, but you've got to be able to, rotate them in and out. And that way they can stay healthy. And then they can also kind of provide some more versatility on the defense for sure. And yeah, we were talking about the Arizona guy, Paris. He has 2 years of eligibility left, which is huge. Like, I think if they're going to go to the transfer portal, like, the 1 year fix, it worked for this year, but now it's kind of like, let's get guys into the program and let's get somebody that the freshmen can learn from for a good amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it gets into maybe our last topic here. But again, if anybody has questions, send them our way. We've had some comments here, but from 3D to Champ. But if anybody has some questions, send them our way. To kind of get, as we begin to wrap up, where this class goes next, I think it's going to be in many ways dictated by some of these decisions from like Desmond Ricks and Isaac Smith and guys like that, to see exactly like what you said earlier, LSU needs then moving forward. But Brian Kelly, we got the chance to speak with him again on Saturday, and he estimated that LSU will end up signing in the mid to high 30s by when it's all said and done, between transfer portal guys and incoming freshmen. And at this point, the class is at 26. So that you could still be seeing another 9-10 guys potentially upwards of that who end up joining this class between now and the February early signing day. And then again, there could be some transfers because that window is going to open up again May 1st through the 15th after spring practice, where LSU could end up adding quite a bit. Certainly out of the transfer portal in particular, at all those areas that we've touched on. Is there anything else you think to add about where the class goes next, or just signing day in general?
Yeah, I'm just interested to find out, if, LSU will obviously, it's going to be kind of relatively quiet. From all the recruiting analysts I've talked to, they've all said, well, you've pretty much got the recruiting class on lock. So I think it'll be a little bit less surprising than what we went through last year. Right. And, but I think, all in all, Brian Kelly did a strong job, as far as like, if everybody signs tomorrow, even if you don't get a Dalen Austin, but then you do get a Desmond Ricks or an Isaac Smith or Nicholas Harbor, I think they'll be pretty much set at every position to, grow and develop long-term, which I think is the goal, right? He doesn't want to take guys from the transfer portal every single year. Well, not like a class of like 15 from the transfer portal, right? And he was saying that, like, okay, we don't want to sign like 30 guys every year either. Like, we want to make sure that we're turning over a lot of scholarship players, but it's also a product of this new age. Kids want to play. And if they're not seeing playing time within like the first 2 years, like, it's just kind of one of those things where they might reevaluate unless they're the kind of guys who stick it out, like a Josh Williams, right? So, yeah. And I think, they got a quarterback, Ricky Collins. We didn't really talk about him in this class. And, that's also important to have because, you don't want to run out of quarterbacks ever So, and he kind of helped bring in like the Kylan Jackson and the Caleb Jackson. He kind of helped like, bring together this LSU Louisiana based recruiting class. So yeah, Nicholas Harbor, so it looks like he's like leaning South Carolina according to all the other outlets, but he can play tight end or edge rusher. So that would also be a huge get for LSU because those are both positions of need.
Yeah. And one interesting little tidbit about Ricky, I think, as most people remember, he was committed to Purdue and then changed to LSU. And now LSU and Purdue are playing in a bowl game. So that'll wrap us up here today. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We're going to have all of your coverage of signing day and LSU football in general over at theadvocate.com and NOLA.com. Keep up with us on our Twitter handles there, scrolling along the bottom. Sign up for our email newsletter. It gets delivered directly to your inbox in the morning. And be sure to check in with us again as we get ready for the Citrus Bowl and everything else about coming down the line here. Thanks, everybody, again for watching. Have a happy holidays to you and yours. For Leah Vann and everybody else at the Advocate, I'm Wilson Alexander. We'll see you next time.